Welcome back to the South America podcast, from the Andes to Amazonia and almost to Antarctica. Today, we have a special guest, Nick Emlen. Hello, Nick. Welcome.
Thank you, Austin. Nice to be with you. Thanks for inviting me.
So, Nick, you're actually changing positions at the moment. You're currently still based in Leiden in the Netherlands, and you will be staying in the Netherlands, but moving to the Friesland campus of the University of Groningen. Is that correct?
That is correct. That's a great institution. So I'm starting there. I've begun teaching there, and I started as an assistant professor there next year.
Fantastic. So, look, you're very welcome on the podcast. Last time we had Rick von Geijn, and he told us a lot about the Sapphire Project, the South American Population History Project. You're also part of this.
Indeed, I am. Yes, I do the anthropological side of the project. Yes.
Fantastic. So we'll get into that later and expand on that. But just for now, so. For all those listeners and viewers out there, who are you, and how did you get started in anthropology and also in studying South America?
Well, let's see. I'm from the U.S. And I did my undergraduate and graduate studies in linguistics and anthropology, always combining those disciplines, and for my PhD research, I spent just under 2 years doing field work in the forested foothills east of the southern Peruvian Andes, where the Andes meets the Amazon, with a group of people called the Machigenga, who speak an Arawak language, and with Quechua speakers who have moved into their territory in order to make coffee plantations, and where everybody also speaks, or many people also speak Spanish. So my PhD research was about the complex multilingualism among Quechua, Spanish, and Machigenga that's sort of arisen through the expansion of the coffee industry into the Amazon from the Andes. And that's an ongoing project. I go whenever I can, though it's harder in this during the pandemic, unfortunately. But yes, that's my own experience to try to understand multilingualism as it's connected to broader, social and economic transformations in South America.
Fascinating. So, what kind of methods do you use to get at these questions then?
Well, I, for this ethnographic project and this ongoing linguistic anthropological project, it's an participant observation kind of fieldwork ethnography kind of project that involves a lot of recording and a lot of analysis of discourse, but is really sort of fundamentally based in the ethnographic practice of participating and living in the lives of people who speak these languages. So I have been very fortunate to spend long periods of time living in these villages where these trilingual villages in this part of the Amazon. And working as a coffee farmer alongside these people, and recording and understanding from the inside what motivates linguistic practices, and how those linguistic practices are forces for the transformation of the local system itself. So it's a living there and understanding from the inside kind of approach. And with the careful analysis of naturally occurring discourse through recordings also.
I see. One thing I'd like to pick up on is I think a lot of people have in their heads, at least, that Quechua, this is the Andes, right? This is the high Andes. This is Machu Picchu. This is the Inca Empire, etc., etc. I think there are a lot of kind of misconceptions about Quechua and Quichua and all of these terms, and who these people are and where they actually live. So maybe you could give us a quick sketch of that, perhaps.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think that I mean, clearly the idea that comes to mind, the image that comes to mind of a Quechua speaker is someone who lives in the rural highlands of Western South America. Um, but the lives of Quechua speakers have always been more diverse than just that, and they continue to be today, particularly with things like with urban migration and even international migration. Um, where a place like New York City today, where you can take Quechua classes and meet Quechua speakers, although there's obviously a lot of shift in that context as well. But another important context in which Quechua has been spoken in various places and frequently is through Amazonian dispersals or in expansions into the Amazon. Going back to the Inca period and probably before, and certainly, especially today with the opening of roads into the Amazon and Quechua speakers moving in search of work and land, and also in the context of the current climate crisis, where the sort of thin kind of margin of survival in some parts of the very high Andes is greatly complicated by climate change, and a good outlet and a good opportunity for someone facing that situation is to move into the Amazon in search of land and labor. And so the Quechuan expansion into the Amazon continues and is a really important part of the multilingual panorama of Western South America.
I see. And where does this all intersect then with the coffee industry then? Because you mentioned that it was coffee farming that kind of occupied a lot of your field time.
Indeed, yes. It's a funny thing when I suppose a lot of people have this experience when they do their PhD research, but I went in search of one question about multilingualism and realized that in order to understand it, I had to immerse myself in something else entirely, which was coffee, because the coffee is during that time, coffee prices were very high, and the coffee, the money that could be made and the livelihood that could be achieved through coffee farming was very good. And so this was drawing people down into these remote parts of the Amazon. And so the sort of day-to-day context in which people were moving between Spanish and Machigenga and Quechua were very much part of the expanding coffee industry into this region. And so trying to understand multilingualism and its social and cultural contexts without understanding the expansion of the coffee industry is just impossible, because that's what people do all day as they move between these languages, is try to figure out where they stand vis-a-vis the coffee industry, to try to wake up every morning and spend all of their hours striving and orienting themselves toward this new emerging economy. So it just it wasn't clear to me at the time that in order to study multilingualism in this region, you would have to know this. But truly, every moment of every day relates to the coffee industry in some way or another. And so the book that I wrote about this is an ethnography of multilingualism, but it's also an ethnography of the coffee industry and its expansion, and the day-to-day labor, the day-to-day linguistic labor of a coffee farmer in this part of the Amazonian frontier. So it's sort of, I think of it as both an ethnography of the coffee industry and of multilingualism, because I think that they're basically the same thing in this place.
Well, there you go. I certainly wouldn't have thought about that either before meeting you and learning about your work. So I think that's really fascinating, is that you get, because ethnography is indeed, it's what people do, right? It's looking at what people actually do, and if that is indeed the case, then you better immerse yourself in a new environment.
Exactly.
New industry, go ways you didn't expect to.
That's right.
Sort of letting the letting the subject of study lead itself in a way, right? You
precisely.
ended up very naturally in the coffee sphere.
Indeed. Yeah, that's right. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that's nice. I think it's also a good piece of advice probably for people in positions like I am, starting out, in the academic journey, as it were, to be led by perhaps unexpected situations, unexpected, cross fertilizations and unexpected paths.
Yeah, I agree. I think that is good advice. Yes.
Excellent. So how did you end up from doing that to where you are now in the Netherlands, and eventually as part of this Sapphire project then?
Well, I first I finished my PhD, and then I came to Leiden first as a postdoc, working with a project in a project about the historical linguistics of the Andes. And so the Leiden University in the Netherlands also in general has a very strong tradition in Andeanist historical linguistics, which is surprising to some people, but it is really a center for this kind of work. And so I sort of got involved in these more historical questions that I think were sort of a natural step from my ethnographic work. Also, a lot easier to do once I had started a family, because it was not possible to spend as much time in South America as I normally do. I got into these. I got into historical linguistics and language contact, and between the Quechuan and Aymaran families in particular. But also sort of the dynamics of multilingualism more generally in Western South America. Typically, I think for probably academics in this age, I moved between a few different projects. One at Brown. I went back to the U.S. and worked at Brown University's John Carter Brown Library, working with 17th century historical documents written in the Aymara language, to understand more about the context of Quechua and Aymara and Puquina language contact in the southern Peruvian and Bolivian Andes. And, between going from one project to the next, eventually found myself in this Sapphire project, which I have been part of since it began, and will also remain part of as I move into more teaching responsibilities at the University of Groningen.
Just for those who didn't, sorry, not to interrupt you, but just for those who didn't listen to the last episode, what would be the sort of elevator pitch or advert for Sapphire then? What's Sapphire all about?
Well, let's see. I think Rick can tell the elevator pitch better than I can, but it has to do with it sort of examines a paradox about South America, which is that there is extraordinary linguistic diversity there among the native languages, not just in the number of languages, but in the genealogical units of languages in South America. And so how to reconcile the paradox is that this is not easily reconciled with the fact that the Americas was one of the most recently colonized parts of Earth by humans. And so at that time depth, it's not clear how such a vastly linguistically diverse place could have arisen in such a short amount of time. That's sort of one of the major background parts of this. But also there's, looking at the interplay between language and trade and migration and all kinds of patterns of social and cultural change in South America. Trying to look at these through a holistic, multidisciplinary perspective can really open new ways of thinking about the past in the Upper Amazon, as this project is focused, a region that is not well understood, frankly, historically, relative to other parts of the world, and where there is much to be learned about the linguistic situation, because this is a project that's very much oriented towards the linguistic situation, but about the history generally, the population history.
Certainly. Yeah, I think it's a fascinating project, and it's already yielding some interesting answers, and hopefully will continue to do so. And as I'm sure it will.
There's much to be said, much progress to be made. So we're fortunate to work in a place with such fascinating material to think about.
Certainly, certainly. So, yeah, you're a field worker. So, any plans to go back to the field? It's been a challenging 2-year period for field workers.
It has. I was there most recently about a year and a half ago, right before the pandemic started, and continuing old projects and starting new ones. And I've been able to keep some momentum virtually through just because now that during the time of my main field work as a PhD student, and now everybody, the electricity and the cellular phone network arrived in the region where I work, and so it's now possible to communicate with people long distance, and so I maintain these research avenues virtually, but it's not. Many people do this very well. In my own capacities, I find that it's best to be there. I also have 2 young children, so that makes it complicated as well to go into the far reaches of the Amazonian frontier. But soon enough, as soon as this global pandemic has eased, which hopefully will happen very soon, or somewhat soon, hopefully, then
yes, we can hope. Yeah.
Indeed, I will be down as soon as possible.
Yeah, well, fantastic. So, yeah, I guess, I mean, we touched on this super briefly earlier, but any advice that you might have for those who are either interested in becoming a South Americanist of some kind or a linguistic anthropologist? Specifically, I was going to say, but either one specifically, do you have, or both, obviously, as in your case, South Americanist who's a linguistic anthropologist. Any advice for the field, for people setting out?
The field is so diverse and so complex, and it's so multidisciplinary, and even within anthropology, the ways that scholars think about South America are so diverse and so specific to their fields that I find it hard to give advice, because every corner of this sort of fragmented academic world has its own expectations of what good and worthwhile research is. So I guess only in the very broadest sense, I guess the first piece of advice is something that we talked about a moment ago, that if one, I faced this myself with having to learn about what the coffee industry was, coming from a background in language and multilingualism. So going down with a clear idea of what's, or embarking on one's fieldwork, wherever that is, in South America or elsewhere, having a clear sense of what it is that you are good at and trained for and want to find, but also an openness towards incorporating a totally new perspective is I think it's important. You see people who come down with a very clear of what they want to do, and they do it and then leave, and nothing else has sort of entered the frame. And then it's also possible to go down without a very clear sense of what one wants to achieve, and that's a problem as well. So a sort of a trade-off between structuredness and creativity and being open to where things go is a difficult balance, and one that's really important, I think. The other one, I did my PhD research about this contact situation between Arawak and Quechuan languages, and also between Spanish. And I guess one piece of advice is to look at the boundaries, or to look at the sort of cracks in between what is normally talked about. I found that as you mentioned earlier, the story about Quechua as an Amazonian language of lowland coffee farmers is just a story that hasn't really been told about Quechua. And indeed, it's a small, relatively speaking, story about Quechua, because most people do live in the highlands. who speak Quechua, and urbanization is a major thing that people have talked about as well. But this was just a story that hadn't been told before, that in fact, there are many people who speak an Amazonian language and an Andean language together. And it's just sort of, it's a little bit off the map for both communities of scholars, Andeanists and Amazonianists. So a lot is said about the sort of the center of each of those places, but less is said about the periphery, or where things meet, and the sort of boundary zones and in between areas. And I think that those are, at a time when there's an anthropologist or a linguist in every community in South America or some, it's it can be helpful to sort of think from the peripheries a bit, to find something that hasn't been said before.
I think that makes a lot of sense, and it's something that certainly captures my imagination. Right? What are the boundaries, and let's go there.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Well, I think on that note, I'll thank you very much for coming on to the podcast. And yeah, perhaps you'll join us again sometime to update us on how that's going. Maybe next time you can do some field work. Yes. And yes, for now, thanks so much. And to all of you watching and listening, thank you for being with us. And yeah, join us next time. Take care. Bye.